Good evening, folks. My name is CJ Dragon Emperor, and I'm about to tell you about the history of the Three Kingdoms, how they came about, what happened during the Three Kingdoms era, and how did they fail. Okay, let's get started. To understand the Three Kingdoms era, we first need to talk about the political system of Imperial China. Imperial China was an autocratic centralized government with an absolute monarchy. This monarchy was ruled by an emperor, or a king if you're going to ancient China. And like all monarchies, it has a divine right to rule. And that divine right to rule is called the Mandate of Heaven. The Mandate of Heaven dictates that an emperor's dynasty can continue on so long as he and his successors behave in a certain way. It's kind of like your parents giving you cookies, or sweets, or anything you want, as long as you behave properly. But with a major twist, unfortunately. If you become a benevolent ruler and keep your dynasty stable, your dynasty will continue on and you'll get the cookie. But if you become an evil emperor and start running China into a muck, then chances are the people are going to revolt against you and replace you with a new emperor. An example of that is the Qin dynasty. Despite being the first imperial dynasty, the Qin emperors were pretty tyrannical from the start. And we're talking about burning the books and burying scholars tyrannical. And, like I said before, when there's an evil and tyrannical dynasty, there's always one man with a huge amount of support of the people willing to overthrow that dynasty. And that man's name was Liu Bang. And he successfully did it, thus creating the Han Dynasty. Now, this dynasty was considered a golden age in Chinese history, and its achievements can tell you that much. Like creating the Silk Road, an ancient trade route that linked with the Western world. In this case, the Middle East and parts of Asia. In fact, it also became a main conduit of trade for the Roman Empire. And also medieval Europe, but that's another story altogether. Anyway, the Han also developed new forms of art and political thinking, such as using Confucianism as a means of governing. The Han also developed new forms of military technology, and speaking of military, the army of the Han Dynasty was extremely powerful. It got rid of many of its enemies and expanded the territory. Unfortunately, the Han's prosperity didn't last long. Just like the Qin Dynasty, the Han Dynasty fell due to political corruption. You're probably thinking, this was because the emperor was getting corrupt, wasn't he? Well, not quite. You see, ancient Chinese dynasties, like the Imperial Han, fell into corruption due to one specific thing, or in this case, a phenomenon, and that was called court culture. If you were an emperor and you can't perform your duties because either A, you're too sick to rule, B, you're too lazy to rule, yeah, I'm looking at you, Garfield, C, you're too incompetent to rule, basically you don't know how to rule in general, or the most common one, you're too young to rule. And let me tell you, there were a lot of child emperors in Imperial China. Now, should either of these things happen to you when you're the emperor, you can hand your state affairs to pretty much anybody with your imperial court. And I do mean anybody. This can include A, the politicians and military commanders such as your imperial chancellor, B, your loving and loyal eunuchs who've been your personal caretakers, or C, the empresses and dowager empresses who love you very much. However, this is where you need to start being careful, because this gives these regions a chance to scheme their way to power, and will do anything for it, causing them to either A, use you as a figurehead with no real power whatsoever, or B, abdicate your butt and proclaim themselves as a new emperor of their new dynasty. Basically, it was the members of the imperial court that were responsible for the corruption and fall of each dynasty in Imperial China. which would last out until 1912. You get the gist? Very good. Now, who do you think is going to gain power during the end of the Han Dynasty? Well, the answer is the eunuchs. 10 of them, to be precise. And surprise, surprise, they began scheming their way to power as well. These guys began taking government jobs for bribes, taxing the poor for their own wealth, heavily, and literally murdering other political opponents while there was a famine that's been growing for 2 years. So finally, Zhang Jiao, leader of a Taoist sect called the Way of Peace, fanned the flames of rebellion and formed an army called the Yellow Turban Rebellion, with millions of followers rising up against the Han Dynasty. Naturally, the imperial court decided to freak out! Thanks to their internal bickering, they were completely unprepared to deal with a huge, large rebellion like this one. Left with no other choice, the imperial court decided to call upon independent warlords from across China and beyond to help deal with the Yellow Turbans. Now, there have been a lot of warlords that have participated in the Yellow Turban Rebellion, and I do mean a lot. But we're mainly sticking to the main four because they pretty much changed the history of China. Cao Cao, the hero of chaos. Sun Jian, the tiger of Jiangdong. Liu Bei, the benevolent warlord. And of course, Dong Zhuo, the fat, overweight tyrant. These warlords literally quelled the rebellion in their own respective regions. And with casualties in the millions, the Han Dynasty was restored to peace. For a short time. In the capital city of Luoyang, Emperor Ling of the Han died in the year 189, leaving his son Emperor Xiao to take the throne. However, this time his uncle He Jin became regent of the Han Dynasty, and like many Han loyalists, he was tired of the eunuchs abusing their power and corrupting the government. So he and Yuan Shao, the nobleman warlord, came up with a brilliant plan. Let's kill the eunuchs! But the Dowager Empress disapproved of that and forbid them from doing so. So they decided to get one infamous warlord to convince the Dowager Empress to approve of the plan. And by convince, I mean threaten her. And that man's name was Dong Zhuo, the evil, overweight tyrant. However, the eunuchs heard that they were going to be killed by He Jin. So naturally, they came up with a brilliant plan. Kill He Jin first! And they did. But it also created a problem for them, and for the capital. Hearing what happened to He Jin, Yuan Shao gathered various warlords to eliminate the eunuchs, which they did. But unfortunately, the people saw what was going on and decided to riot, burning the capital city of Luoyang alive. This caused the young emperor and his little brother to flee the capital city, waiting for the violence to pass. Meanwhile, Dong Zhuo arrived with his army in Luoyang, and found the emperor outside the capital. Understandably confused, he decided, you know what, let's scoop up the emperor and get him back to the capital city and find out what's going on. Which he did. And when he arrived at the capital city, he saw that everything was in chaos. Now, normally, if he was a Han loyal retainer, he would restore the Han to its former glory and everything would be peaceful. But seeing as how he's an overweight tyrant, he decided to take advantage of the opportunity. And bada bing bada boom, he ruled over the Han Dynasty as the emperor's regent. One of his first acts was to depose the previous emperor, Xiao, and replace him with a new one. And that kid's name was Emperor Shan. As for the previous young emperor, well, he killed him by poisoning him. And that's not the only worst thing he did. After getting rid of the previous emperor, he began a reign of terror, where he ruled with an iron fist, killed anybody who spoke ill of his regency, and treated the emperor like crap. Luckily, every warlord hated him because of his own tyranny and abuse of power. So Yuan Shao gathered various warlords to rise up and defeat Dong Zhuo. Thus, the coalition against Dong Zhuo began, with 100,000 men rising up against the tyranny against Dong Zhuo. And boy oh boy did Yuan Shu got the best. Warlords like Cao Cao, Sun Jian, and Yuan Shu, Yuan Shao's half-brother. Unfortunately for the coalition, Dong Zhuo had one ace up his sleeve. He was the protege of Dong Zhuo and adopted son. And to top that off, he's known as one of the most strongest warlords in all of China. That man's name was Lu Bu. And that guy was a beast. Here's a video clip to show you.
There's only one of them! Don't pull back! Caution now!
Bad dubbing aside, Lu Bu, as I mentioned before, was a beast in combat. He never lost a duel to anyone, and no warlord was ever stupid enough to challenge him to one. Luckily, Sun Jian launched a surprise attack in Luoyang, forcing Dong Zhuo to flee to Chang'an. After this initial success, however, the war entered into a stalemate, for two reasons. One, with Lu Bu around, it was going nowhere. Number two, these guys secretly hated each other. So everybody went home, leaving Dong Zhuo safe. Well, until this happened.
This is too good a resting place for that swine.
Yeah, looks like Dong Zhuo should have been more careful when hiring Lu Bu. Why? Because Lu Bu has a history of backstabbing literally every warlord he has ever fought for. And Lu Bu's story for betrayal is one that may or may not be real. This was according to the legend in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, okay? So bear with me. Now, according to legend, Wang Yun, a minister of the Han, had a beautiful daughter named Diao Chan, who was so beautiful and pale that she literally put the moon to shame. Sorry, buddy. So he came up with a brilliant plan. He introduced her daughter to both Lu Bu and Dong Zhuo and started a fierce love triangle. After finding out Dong Zhuo had taken Diao Chan as their concubine, Lu Bu became furious. And, well, you guys know. Now, what Dong Zhuo did, you'd think the Han would go in peace. Yeah, right. It didn't. Why? Remember the Yellow Turban Rebellion? The rebellion literally devastated the Han government. How, you may ask? Well, when the Han government decided to rely on the warlords and their armies, given how massive a large rebellion was, it kinda diminished the central control of the government, giving the warlords to act almost completely independently and rule over their own local regions themselves, which kind of explains Dong Zhuo. Speaking of Dong Zhuo, remember when he took power? Well, that showed how devastated the Han Dynasty government was, and when he died, it left China with a power gap. This gave the warlords an opportunity to try to gain power and riches for themselves. How did they do that? By going on a full-on civil war. It was like Game of Thrones. Only there weren't any dragons, there weren't much magic. Well, maybe there were some strong warriors, but still, they weren't supernatural. With that in mind, let's talk about the current state of this civil war, shall we? Now, there have been a ton of warlords that have been trying to take control of China at the time. But we're mainly sticking to the ones, as I previously stated, that have made a big impact on Chinese history. And those warlords are Liu Bei, Sun Jian and his two sons, excluding the daughter, and Cao Cao. And let me tell you, Cao Cao went to conquering right away. First, he subjugated nearby remnants of the Yellow Turn Rebellion into his army. And then he managed to capture Yu province from Yuan Shu with that army. So far, Cao Cao's on a good roll. Good for him. But unfortunately, tragedy struck for him. Turns out, his family was murdered in Shu province, who were living there. Fueled with anger and hate, Cao Cao held Tao Qian, the governor of that province, responsible, and launched a cruel invasion where he pillaged cities and murdered 100,000 civilians. Luckily, Liu Bei arrived to help Tao Qian and held it off Cao Cao's forces for a while. But unfortunately for Cao Cao, a rebellion was staged in his home province by Lu Bu himself, forcing Cao Cao to halt his invasion of Shu province, and fled back to Yan province to defeat Lu Bu, which he did. However, there was one thing that gave Cao Cao more power than he ever had, and that was the authority of the Han Emperor. In 196 AD, Cao Cao welcomed the Han Emperor into his territory and moved the capital to Xuchang, giving him control over the Han Dynasty as regent. You're probably thinking, what happened to Sun Jian? Well, he went and served under Yuan Shu. Why, you may ask? Well, probably because he had one item that didn't belong to him. And that was one of the jaded imperial seals in China he found in Luoyang, under a bottom of a well. Created by Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, these seals were used to legitimize the rulership of an emperor, signaling the mandate of heaven. Now you'd think Sun Jian would use the seal to issue his own mandate. But he didn't. Why? Because Sun Jian was a loyal retainer of the Han, and he wouldn't dare try doing that. Plus, there are still Han loyalists still kicking about. So, try to become emperor using that seal, and you're basically making yourself a traitor to the Han, even though it's collapsing. Well, anyway, Sun Jian began participating in many battles while serving under Yuan Shu, one of which led to his death. And that was the Battle of Xiangyang, where Sun Jian died in an ambush. His eldest son, Sun Ce, took over, and wanted to conquer the lands of Jiangdong, so he borrowed Yuan Shu's troops in exchange for the imperial seal, and began a conquest in Jiangdong, where he succeeded. Now let's check on Liu Bei and see how he's doing, shall we? Liu Bei was in charge of Shu province after Qiao Cheng gave it to him before passing away. But unfortunately, he invited Lu Bu into his province. Surprise, surprise, Lu Bu betrayed him and took over. Before we move on, I'd like to show you a map of China during this time period. Are you ready? Here we go. Here is a rough map of China being at full-on civil war. Now that's out of the way, let's talk about Liu Bei and Cao Cao dealing with Lu Bu, shall we? Cao Cao, along with Liu Bei, invaded Jiapi and managed to capture the mighty Lu Bu. When captured, Lu Bu offered to join Cao Cao's forces, and Cao Cao considered the offer, considering he's looking for talented warriors. But his advisors and Liu Bei were like, "Don't do it, dude! This guy's backstabbed every warlord he's ever fought for, and you want to take that risk?" So Cao Cao did the next best thing.
Farewell, then.
Let your pride in being the best die with you here in Xiaoping.
Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about Yuan Shu and Yuan Shao, shall we? Yuan Shu, after gaining the imperial seal from Sun Ce, declared himself emperor of the Zhong dynasty. In case you weren't paying attention, this was a bad move. One, because the Han Emperor is still breathing, and number two, the main one being, there's still Han loyalists still kicking. So naturally, everybody attacked Yuan Shu. Matter of fact, the imperial court did. Heck, even his allies cut ties with him. So Yuan Shu was forced to flee to Yuan Shao. Well, he tried to, but he died of illness on the way. But even if he did manage to successfully flee to Yuan Shao, chances are he's gonna kill him. I mean, he is considered a Han traitor. Speaking of Yuan Shao, he was busy at the north defeating his enemies, which he totally did and gained some of their territory. In the year 200 AD, this gave Yuan Shao complete control of the Central Plains, but he wanted more. So he declared war on Cao Cao, because A, he needed territory, and B, he was kind of getting jealous of Cao Cao holding power over the emperor. And so the Battle of Guandu began, where Cao Cao landed a decisive victory against Yuan Shao, and Yuan Shao was forced to flee. Also, when he fled, Yuan Shao died of illness. This gave Cao Cao an opportunity to conquer the Central Plains for himself. You're probably thinking, what happened to Sun Ce? Well, back in his territory, looks like to me he had a lot of trouble that got him killed. After Sun Ce helped defeat Yuan Shu, he focuses on attempting to invade Xu Chang. Unfortunately, Xu Gong tried to stand against him, and Sun Ce executed him. As a result, the remnants of Xu Gong ambushed and assassinated Sun Ce in the year 200. So now Sun Quan, Sun Ce's younger brother, took over his territory. You're probably thinking, what happened to Liu Bei? Well, let's go back to Shu province. Liu Bei tried to launch an attack on Cao Cao, but unfortunately he got obliterated. Remember Jing province, it's going to be important later on. Anyway, Cao Cao gained control of the Central Plains in the year 207. This gave Cao Cao a massive army, so he decided to strike south towards Liu Biao. Luckily, as I mentioned before, Liu Bei was serving with him, and held Cao Cao off for a while, such as the Battle of Bao Wang, where he gained a highly infamous strategist named Zhuge Liang, the Sleeping Dragon, and one of China's most intelligent intellects. However, this victory wouldn't last long, because Liu Biao died in the year 208 AD. His son Liu Kong took over, and immediately surrendered to Cao Cao. This not only freaked out Liu Bei, but also gave Cao Cao a huge advantage, because he was coming down on Liu Bei with a massive force. Seeing the situation turned against him, Liu Bei had no choice. In the Battle of Changbang, he had thousands of civilians to flee with him to Xiakou. From there, he made a desperate alliance with Sun Quan in order to face Cao Cao himself. Okay, now that was a lot to cover. But what you really need to know is Cao Cao's getting closer to gaining control of China. And he's about to stomp on Liu Bei and Sun Quan. These two have one chance, one shot, one battle to stop Cao Cao's advance. And that battle was the infamous Battle of Chi Bi, but most of you know it as the Battle of the Red Cliffs. The Battle of the Red Cliffs was considered the largest navy battle in history. Cao Cao's forces had a massive 250 forces versus Liu Bei and Sun Quan's combined might of 50,000. So yeah, these guys were heavily outnumbered. But there was one bit of a bad luck with Cao Cao. You see, in order to get to Sun Quan and Liu Bei, he would have to cross the mighty Yangtze River. Why is that a problem, you may ask? Well, because most of Cao Cao's forces came from the north, and they're not too comfortable in fighting in sea battles. So yeah, Cao Cao had a hard time defeating the coalition of Sun Quan and Liu Bei. But luckily for Sun Quan and Liu Bei, one officer came up with a very brilliant plan to defeat them. That man's name was Huang Gai, and his plan was simple. He sent a letter to Cao Cao saying that he and many of his troops wanted to defect to his side and was willing to bring some of Sun Quan's and Liu Bei's finest ships and weapons. Cao Cao agreed. But little did he know, however, that those ships were full of flammable reeds and oil. So when they approached Cao Cao's fleet, you know what? I'll let this video speak for itself.
It's a fire ship! So! On behalf of the entire Sun family, I've come to offer you our warmest greetings!
Bing bada boom, you got yourself an instant victory. Well done, Huang Gai. Well done. With his ships and camp destroyed, Cao Cao ordered a difficult retreat to the rain and marshlands, where more of his troops died of illness and disease. This not only means Cao Cao will never have his chance to take the south again, but it also marks the beginning of the Three Kingdoms. After the Battle of Red Cliffs, the three warlords started defeating many small competitors in their own regions, and beyond. And in the year 217, China looked a little bit like this. Cao Cao continued his campaign to the south, but with little success. Matter of fact, no success. Same with Sun Quan when he launched his campaign against Cao Cao. As for Liu Bei, he gained a little bit of success against Cao Cao. And that success was the Hanzhong campaign, where he gained control of the territory and declared himself king of Hanzhong. It almost seemed like Liu Bei was going to be the one to take down Cao Cao, until Sun Quan betrayed Liu Bei and Lily broke their alliance. Why? Because Liu Bei and Sun Quan were fighting over a territory called Jing Province. You see, after the Battle of Chibi, Liu Bei gained the majority of Jing Province, whereas Sun Quan only gained a small bit of a territory of Jing, which made Sun Quan want to go over there and take the territory for himself. Except there is one bit of a problem, and that problem was Guan Yu, the god of war and Liu Bei's sworn brother. With him in charge of Jing Province, there's no way Wu would ever dare to attack him, at least not in a straight-up fight. Luckily, they had an opportunity to strike. Guan Yu launched an invasion against Cao Cao's forces in the Battle of Fangchang. Seeing this as an opportunity, Sun Quan sent his best man, Lu Meng, to invade Jing Province while Guan Yu was out fighting. And he succeeded in doing so. And as for Guan Yu, well, after Lu Meng captured him, Sun Quan offered Guan Yu to join him into his army. But Guan Yu said no, and, well, this happened.
In that case...
Yeah, that's gonna bite Sun Quan in the butt at some point. Anyway, with Guan Yu dead, Sun Quan took over the majority of Jing province for himself. However, something changed back in Cao Cao's territory that destroyed the Han Dynasty completely. Cao Cao died of a head tumor in the year 220 AD. And the control over the Han went to his son, Zhao Pi. Unlike his father, Zhao Pi wasn't in any way loyal to the Han Emperor, so he forces him to abdicate and becomes the new emperor of the state of Wei, specifically Zhao Wei. Remember that guy bowing down to him? You might want to remember him. He's kind of important. However, Liu Bei and Sun Quan weren't having that. So a year later, Liu Bei decides to declare himself emperor of Shu Han. And a few years later, Sun Quan decided to declare himself emperor of Eastern Wu. Well, first he was declared king of Wu as a vassal of Wei, but then he got tired of being Wei's puppet, so he decided to declare himself an independent ruler of Wu in order to get away from Wei. But then, tired of being the only king in this realm, so he decided to become emperor. The main point is the Han Dynasty has ended and the Three Kingdoms have been formed. And when the Three Kingdoms finally formed, not much happened really. For the next few decades, these guys continued fighting each other, but it would almost always end in a stalemate, and nobody pretty much really got anywhere. But it provided us with neat battles. Like the Battle of Yiling, where Liu Bei led the army of Shu to take revenge on Wu. The incident at Guanling, where one of Sun Quan's finest men built an entire fake naval army just to scare Wei into retreating. And the Battle of the Wuzhong Plains, where Shu and Wei's brilliant strategists fight in a battle of wits. You're probably asking, how did it all end? Did Liu Bei finally unite China and created a land of benevolence? No, he died 2 years into his reign. Did Sun Quan finally unite the land under his family's name? Nope, he died too, about 23 years into his reign. Did Zhao Pi finally fulfill his father's ambitions of unifying China as the new hero of chaos? The answer is nope, nope, nope. The truth is, neither state won, and they fell to the usual problems that plague Chinese dynasties. With that in mind, let's talk first about Shu. After Liu Bei's death, his son Liu Shan took over. Liu Shan wasn't the wisest nor keenest ruler of Shu. Come to think of it, he didn't know the first thing about ruling. So Zhuge Liang stepped in as regent, and for a while Shu became stable. That is, until the Battle of the Wuzhong Plains emerged and he died of illness. After Zhuge Liang's death, there were a ton of regents who tried stepping in to maintain control of Shu. Regents like Jiang Wang, Fei Yi, and Jian Wei all stepped in to maintain control of Shu and bring stability to the government. Unfortunately, power began to fall into the hands of a corrupt eunuch faction, led by none other than Liu Shan's favorite one, Huang Hua. Huang Hua was as small-minded as he is corrupt. He demoted and slandered anyone who spoke ill of him, and he convinced the emperor to make stupid mistakes that threatened the state of Shu. Basically, Huang Hua was mostly responsible for the fall of Shu. For example, when Liu Shan heard of Wei attacking Shu again, this time in a massive military invasion, he had two options. Either A, listen to Jiang Wei and make preparations for war, or B, listen to Huang Hua and do absolutely nothing. Surprise, surprise, he listened to Huang Hua. And things got real ugly fast. Wei launched a massive, large-scale full invasion against Shu. And let me tell you, Shu was struggling. And by struggling, I mean Wei managed to surround Chengdu, the capital city of Shu at the time. Seeing the situation turn against him completely, he had no choice but to do this.
Then I will surrender the Shu.
After that happened, Shu completely fell to Wei within a year. Thus came to the ending of Shu. Now let's move on to Wei. You're probably thinking, what happened to Zhao Pi? Well, he died 6 years into his reign. Zhao Rui took the throne, and for 13 years Wei seemed stable, but unfortunately he died of illness too. What really began Wei's fall was the third emperor, Cao Fang. You see, Cao Fang was still 8 years old at the time, so he didn't know much about ruling. So, two regents stepped up to the plate to take control of the dynasty while the emperor was still young. Cao Shuang, the regent of Wei, and of course, Sima Yi, the devious co-regent of Wei. Think of these two as the Chinese version of Mark Antony versus Octavian, with Cao Shuang being Mark Antony and Sima Yi being Octavian. Sima Yi was an excellent strategist and expert politician. He managed to fight Zhuge Liang in the Battle of the Wujiang Plains in a battle of wits, and managed to capture Liao Dong after crushing the state of Yan. As for Cao Shuang, he wasn't much of a capable regent himself. Come to think of it, he was incompetent and easily corruptible, and had little success in many of his battles. Like in the Battle of Mount Xingxi, where he was defeated in an ambush and forced to flee to the capital of Luoyang. Long story short, Sima Yi became more popular than Cao Shuang. Jealous of him, Cao Shuang decided to strip him of political authority and reduced him to Grand Tutor with no real official powers. Naturally, Sima Yi became pretty angry. Or in this case, extremely angry. So when Cao Shuang took the young emperor to the Gaoping tombs, Sima Yi made his move and staged a coup against him by taking over the capital city of Luoyang, convincing the Dowager Empress that Cao Shuang was a traitor, and pretty much killing anyone loyal to Cao Shuang. He successfully gained control of the Wei as regent. As for Cao Shuang, well, this happened.
Traitors! You dare to usurp my throne!
So now Sima Yi ruled as regent as Zhao Wei, alongside with his own sons, Sima Shi and Sima Zhao. While they managed to keep Wei in a stable government, these guys were next-level usurpers. The Sima clan killed any political officials not loyal to them, and treated the Wei emperors like pawns in their game. For example, when Sima Shi became regent, he deposed Cao Fang and replaced him with Cao Mao. When Sima Zhao became regent, he consolidated power and authority for himself, leaving the emperor and the empress dowager with only a tiny speck. These actions of the Sima clan caused a number of rebellions to appear in Sichuan, specifically 3 of them, to oust the Sima clan out of power. The first was led by Wang Ling, but it inevitably failed. The second was led by Guanzhou Jian and Wen Qin, but like the previous one, it failed. Zhuge Dan led the third and final one, but like the others, it failed. The point I'm trying to make here is the Sima clan were gaining ever more power, and the Zhao loyalists want to get rid of them. Heck, even Zhao Mao was tired of the tyranny of the Sima clan, so he staged a coup against them. Too bad it ended in failure, and with his, well, untimely death, which resulted in Cao Huang becoming the new emperor of Wei. But the final nail in Wei's coffin was the final regent of Wei, Sima Yan. Like Zhao Pi before him, Sima Yan forced Cao Huang to abdicate and created the new Jin dynasty as a replacement of Wei. Now there are 2 states down, but there's one more that hasn't fallen and is about to fall, and that is Wu. So let's talk about Wu. Okay, the fall of Wu would be majorly long in this one, so I'll try to make this short, okay? It all began with the death of Sun Quan. When he died, Sun Lian took the throne, but unfortunately he was 10 years old, making him young and inexperienced. So naturally Zhuge Ke and Sun Jun stepped in as regents for the young emperor. But unfortunately for Zhuge Ke, Sun Jun betrayed him and assassinated him in a coup. But don't worry, Sun Jun got his comeuppance and died of illness. His cousin Sun Jin became regent of Wu, but wasn't much of a likable regent. Why? Because he failed in helping 2 rebellions, one with his cousin and the other by himself. Killed a famous and likable officer out of anger, and being oppressive to the young emperor. He even went so far as to depose him, and replace him with Sun Chu, who already hates the regent. So he had Ding Feng and a few other officers stage a coup and kill Sun Qian, which they did, thus restoring power to the emperor. Too bad Sun Chu didn't have much knowledge of ruling. So he had Pu Yangxing handle state affairs for the majority of his rule. Basically, it was almost near political chaos. But the real chaos, the one that damaged Wu completely, was the final emperor of Wu. His name was Sun Huao. Sun Huao was a tyrant's dream come true. He began killing anyone who spoke ill of his rule, and began partying and charming the ladies, than actually governing. Which is a bad idea when another dynasty is coming to get you. And guess what? The Jin came a-knocking down. Jin launched a full-scale invasion against Wu. Surprise, surprise, Sun Huao surrendered, and Jin finally unified China in the year 280. Thus ending the 3 kingdoms. And also ending this video. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like. If you want me to talk about anything Dynasty Warriors related, just for fun, or if you're big time Dynasty Warriors fans, please leave them in the comments below and subscribe. But if you also want me to talk about anything related to the 3 Kingdoms events, hence just for historical content, also subscribe and comment. But until then, I will see you guys in the next video. Farewell, my comrades.